Princess Lyra had always believed her world would never fall. The empire lived high above the floating mountains, wrapped in silver winds that carried soft songs through the air. Every night, their towers glowed like lanterns across the sky, and every morning their people walked peaceful paths lined with crystal flowers. Lyra grew up thinking the universe was kind, and danger was a distant story told by wandering merchants. But everything she believed shattered in a single night, the night the stars went silent. It began with a vibration under her feet, gentle at first, like a heartbeat she did not belong to. Lyra stood on her balcony overlooking the endless sky, confused as the winds fell still. The peace she always knew felt suddenly fragile. She leaned over the railing, trying to understand the strange quietness that spread across the city. Then she saw them, dark shapes emerging from the horizon, moving like shadows tearing through the light. At first she counted only 3, then 7, then dozens. They flew in formation, sharp and merciless, carrying no banners and no lights, only the chilling promise of war. The alarms sounded late, almost drowned by the thunder of engines. Guards rushed into the palace, shouting orders, pushing civilians toward the safe chambers beneath the towers. Lyra tried to move with them, but the sky erupted before she took her second step. A beam of violet energy tore through the air and struck one of the outer towers. The beautiful structure exploded into shards of glowing glass, raining down like deadly stars upon the people below. The screams that followed echoed through every hallway. The raiders had arrived. Lyra had heard stories about them, how they stripped planets bare, how they conquered without warning, how they valued fear more than gold. But she never imagined they would come for her people. They were peaceful, known for art and diplomacy, not weapons of war. There was no reason for an invasion, and yet they did not need a reason. They only needed an opportunity. Guards grabbed Lyra's arm and tried to pull her toward the far exit. She wanted to fight, to call her council, to protect her people, but the palace walls shook violently. Another blast hit the courtyard, reducing the giant mosaic floor to wildfire and dust. Lyra stumbled as the ground cracked beneath her. Smoke filled her lungs. The guards pushed her harder, their own fear barely hidden. "Your Highness, we must leave now," one shouted, but his voice broke midway as a soldier crashed through the wall in a cloud of debris. He was enormous, twice the height of any guard. His armor looked like living metal pulsing with red veins. His eyes glowed with cold hunger. Before the guards could strike, the warrior slammed his weapon down, releasing a shockwave that sent them flying across the corridor. Lyra screamed as they hit the ground, unconscious. She ran. Her feet pounded the uneven floor as flames spread across the hall. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she needed to move, needed to survive long enough to find help for her people. But her path was filled with smoke, collapsing walls and bodies, civilians lying motionless among broken statues and shattered lights. As she reached the central chamber, everything went dark. A giant warship had lowered itself above the palace, blocking out the moonlight. Its metallic surface reflected nothing, swallowing all brightness like a hungry void. Soldiers dropped from its underbelly, surrounding the chamber. Lyra took one step backward, but there was nowhere to go. A cold metal hand grabbed her shoulder, twisting her arms behind her back. She gasped in pain as energy cuffs locked around her wrists. Through the screams, through the fires, through the falling ruins of her home, she heard only one sentence from the commander. "Take the princess alive. Her execution will break their spirit." In that moment, Lyra's heart sank deeper than the ashes beneath her feet. Her world had fallen, and her death had already been chosen. Far beyond the empire, beyond the floating towers and the shattered skis, Hale watched in silence. He was a human warrior, part of a small delegation sent from Earth to study a people admired across the galaxy for their wisdom and beauty. Humans were often underestimated by other species, slow, fragile, unremarkable, but had always believed that courage was not measured by size or strength, but by the choices one made when the world was against them. He had been exploring the outskirts of the capital when the attack began. From the forested cliffs above the city, he had seen the flashes of purple energy and the distant fires devouring everything. Panic rippled through the streets, and he watched helplessly as they fled, their elegant forms stumbling over debris and each other. Had wanted to run, to hide in the shadows as his people had instructed, but his thoughts kept returning to the princess, the young leader whose calm demeanor and gentle voice had captivated him since the first diplomatic meeting. He could not abandon her. For days had moved stealthily through the ruined city, avoiding the patrols, learning their patterns, and listening to the whispers of survivors. Every time he caught sight of a captured or a burned tower, he clenched his fists, feeling a storm of anger and fear building inside him. The humans had no ships powerful enough to challenge the head-on. There were no reinforcements, but he could not stand still, not when Lyra was in their hands. Not when her life was slipping further into the grasp of an enemy who would show no mercy. When finally reached the palace grounds, he froze for a moment, hidden behind a collapsed pillar. Smoke rose in heavy clouds from the upper chambers, curling like serpents into the sky. The central hall, once a place of beauty, filled with crystal mosaics and soft light, was now a cage. Lyra sat at its center, her wrists bound by glowing cuffs, surrounded by soldiers who eyed her like predators watching prey. His chest tightened. She looked fragile and terrified, yet there was still fire in her gaze. He had seen that same fire in the eyes of warriors who had nothing left to lose. It reminded him why he could not fail. He took a slow breath, weighing his options. There were no doors unguarded, no weapons within reach. Even if he attacked directly, the numbers were too high, the risk too great. But then he noticed the strange platform beneath Lyra. It was old, ornate, and pulsing faintly with light. The emissaries had told him stories of such devices. They were relics, powered by energy, meant for ceremonies and offerings. Usually, only those who volunteered could activate them, but perhaps, just perhaps, thought, the rules could be bent. He crouched lower, pressing his back against the rubble, and considered what he was about to do. If he stepped onto the platform first, if he offered himself instead of her, the device might accept him. It might release her. It might save her life. The risk was unimaginable. They would attack the moment he moved. His body could be torn apart, his life taken instantly. But Lyra's life, her life, was worth far more than his own. Always. His eyes met hers for the first time across the distance. There was fear, yes, but also a spark of recognition. A silent plea that only he could hear. And something deep in his chest twisted, a mixture of dread, determination, and hope. He had never believed humans could be heroes in the stories told across the stars. Yet here he was, ready to defy death itself, for someone who had never asked for his help, yet needed it more than anyone. Stepping carefully from shadow to shadow, moved closer. Each step was a gamble. A single mistake could end everything. Flames from fallen towers illuminated the hall, casting fleeting reflections across his path. Dust choked the air. The guards shifted positions, unaware of the human moving like a ghost among the ruins. The closer he got, the louder his heart thundered. He felt the weight of history pressing down, the eyes of an empire and a princess he barely knew but now could not live without. Finally, he reached the edge of the platform. The energy beneath Lyra's hands flickered as if sensing his presence. His fingers twitched. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, to stay alive. But he took a deep breath, held it, and stepped forward, knowing that the next moment could change everything, or end it. Crouched behind the ruined pillars, his eyes fixed on the glowing platform beneath Princess Lyra. The chamber was alive with tension. Soldiers patrolled the shattered floors like wolves, their metal armor clinking with each deliberate step. The princess remained at the center, her wrists bound in glowing cuffs, the soft hum of energy pulsing around her. Every second that passed tightened the chains on her arms and on his heart. He knew that hesitation could mean death for her, for him, for all hope. He had only one chance, a dangerous, desperate idea that seemed impossible even as it formed in his mind. The ancient platform, he recalled, could accept a voluntary offering, something they had mentioned during his diplomatic visits. Normally, it demanded the life or energy of the chosen participant. Thought of stepping onto it first. If he could convince it to accept him as the volunteer, Perhaps it would release Lyra from her chains. Perhaps it would save her from the execution they had planned. It was foolish, risky, likely to fail, yet the thought of doing nothing, of letting the princess die before his eyes, was unbearable, swallowed hard, forcing calm into his trembling hands. Humans were not known for their strength in the galaxy. They were fragile, untested, and overlooked by almost every alien race. But sometimes, he realized, courage mattered more than muscle. Sometimes, one human could stand where armies could not. He shifted his weight, inching forward along the cracked flooring. Flames from the fallen towers reflected off the walls, casting long, flickering shadows that danced like ghosts. Every movement had to be precise. One wrong step and they would notice. He watched a guard turn his head, saw the glowing cuffs tighten around Lyra's wrists, and felt a pang of urgency that twisted his stomach. He could not fail. Paused at the platform's edge. The air seemed to thrum, as if aware of his presence. He raised a hand, trembling slightly, and whispered a silent promise, "I will not let you die." Then he stepped forward. The moment his boots touched the platform, the ground pulsed with energy. A white light spread across the floor, washing over him like liquid silver. The soldiers froze, their instincts uncertain. Something about the human on the platform confused them. This device, meant for the should not recognize him. Yet the energy coiled around his arms, wrapping and binding, pulling his body toward the surface. Pain shot through him, sharp and sudden, but he gritted his teeth. Every fiber of his being screamed to retreat. Every instinct begged him to survive. But he kept his hands pressed to the glowing edges, forcing the light to continue, willing it to work. From her chains, Lyra's eyes widened in disbelief. She lifted a trembling hand as if to reach him, but the cuffs glowed brighter, forming an invisible barrier. Her heart raced. She could not understand what he was doing, only that he had chosen her over himself. Fear and awe mixed in her gaze, and for a brief moment she saw a different kind of strength, a raw human kind that she had never witnessed before. The platform shuddered violently under. Sparks of golden energy shot into the air. The commander shouted, stepping forward, fury in every movement. "Human, step down," he barked, raising his weapon to strike. But the moment the commander neared, the platform pulsed again, stronger, its energy forming a protective shield around. The light was no longer gentle or ceremonial. It was alive, responding to the human's will and determination. Pain tore through his body, but he forced his mind to focus on Lyra. Every step, every breath, every ounce of strength was dedicated to her. The platform's light coiled around the chains on her wrists, and slowly, miraculously, the bindings began to weaken. Tiny sparks floated away, as if the energy itself recognized that a life was being protected by choice, by sacrifice. Lyra's lips parted, her voice caught in her throat. She could only whisper her astonishment, almost to herself. A human is saving me." The soldiers hesitated, unsure how to respond to what they could not understand. His chest burned, his arms screamed with pain, but he pressed on, keeping the platform's energy focused, willing it to do what logic said it could not. Every second stretched into eternity, and in that stretch the human warrior showed something they had never seen: courage that reasoned, hope that challenged despair, and a heart willing to risk everything for another life. The chamber shook as pressed his hands against the glowing platform. The light coiled around his arms and legs, wrapping him in a searing embrace, yet he did not falter. Every nerve in his body screamed in pain, every instinct begged him to retreat. But when his eyes met Lyra, across the hall, he felt a surge of determination stronger than fear. She was the reason he endured, the reason he risked everything. Her life was worth every heartbeat, every ache, every second of agony. The commander stormed toward him, roaring commands in a voice that shook the walls. "Human, step aside or die." Soldiers behind him raised weapons, their eyes wide with confusion. The platform pulsed with brighter energy, as if sensing the threat. The light spread outward in ripples, forming a protective dome around and the platform. The soldiers tried to attack, but each step toward him met with an invisible barrier of energy that threw them backward. Sparks crackled where their weapons met the shield. Lyra's eyes widened in astonishment. Her chains trembled as golden threads of light reached for her, unraveling the energy cuffs slowly, carefully. She gasped, pressing her palms to the cool floor, willing the light to free her. It moved with a strange, living rhythm, as though understanding that someone else's life now hung in the balance. For the first time since the attack began, hope glimmered in her heart. Gritted his teeth as the platform's energy tightened around him. Pain flared across his chest and arms, making his vision blur, but he ignored it. The commander was relentless, swinging a massive spear that cut the air with deadly precision. Felt the force of each strike in the vibrations of the platform beneath him. The light responded, bending and rising like a protective wave, deflecting the attacks while simultaneously wrapping around Lyra's chains. The princess's voice broke through the roar of battle. "Please," she cried, her tone a mix of fear, gratitude, and disbelief. She wanted to reach him, to grab his hand, to pull him away from the searing energy. But the platform's shield was absolute. She could only watch, her heart twisting with worry and awe. She had never seen a human act with such fearless determination. In that moment was not just a visitor from another world. He was her shield, her hope, the living proof that courage could come from the places. The chamber shook violently. Pieces of the ceiling collapsed, falling in showers of rubble and fire. The soldiers screamed and scattered, unsure whether to fight or flee. Yet the commander pressed on, driven by fury and disbelief. His muscles burned with effort, his body trembling from the strain, but he forced himself upright. He felt the platform pulse violently beneath him, recognizing his will, feeding on it, turning it into something more powerful than its design intended. Slowly, the cuffs around Lyra's wrists began to crack. Tiny threads of energy fell away like starlight dissolving into the air. She could finally feel her fingers moving. Her chest rose and fell as relief and disbelief collided. She realized with a racing heart that had chosen to take the risk for her, had stepped into danger without hesitation, without question. This was no mission. This was no duty. This was sacrifice, the kind of bravery that legends were made of. Felt himself weakening. His knees buckled slightly, his breath came in shallow gasps, yet he would not let go. His gaze stayed locked on Lyra, willing her to understand that he would endure this torment, would survive the unbearable pain just to see her free. The commander's weapon struck the dome of energy again and again, sparks flying, echoing through the chamber like thunder. Gritted his teeth and pushed back with every ounce of strength. And then, with a final surge of light, the chains around Lyra shattered completely. They fell to the floor in glowing fragments, lifeless and broken. She stumbled toward, tears streaming down her face, gratitude and awe pouring from her every movement. But she stopped, seeing the strain on him, the way the energy still clung to his body, shaking and pulsing dangerously. She whispered, voice trembling, You saved me." He managed a weak smile, sweat and light glistening on his face. "I couldn't let them take you," he said, voice strained but firm. "Not now, not ever." The soldiers hesitated, fear finally replacing their fury. The energy of the platform had turned the tide. For the first time, the humans, and even the princess witnessed what courage truly looked like. An ordinary man facing impossible odds to save a life that was not even his own. Body trembled under the platform's relentless energy. Every muscle burned, every nerve screamed, but he did not let go. The light coiled around him, stronger, almost as if it were alive, testing his resolve, demanding his surrender. Sweat poured down his face, his lungs ached, and his vision blurred. Pain and fear clawed at him, whispering that he could not endure this. But the thought of Lyra, free yet vulnerable, gave him strength no agony could break. Lyra stood a few feet away, trembling, watching him with wide, terrified eyes. Her heart ached at the sight of kneeling yet unyielding, his face pale and determined. She wanted to run to him, to tear him away from the light that burned his skin, but the invisible energy shield prevented any approach. All she could do was reach out with her eyes, silently pleading, "Please, don't leave me." The commander roared with fury, stepping forward through the chaos. His soldiers raised weapons, claws, and energy spears, trying to break the humans' defiance. Sparks flew as weapons collided with the protective barrier around, throwing some soldiers backward. But the platform's energy responded to his will, bending, pulsing, and shielding him. It was no longer just a relic. It had become an extension of his determination, a living testament to his courage. Pain lanced through his arms and legs, spreading like wildfire. His fingers cramped, his knees buckled, but he gritted his teeth and held on. Every heartbeat felt like a hammer pounding against his ribs. He knew he could not keep this up for long. The platform demanded more than his body could give, more than his mind could endure. And yet he refused to falter, for Lyra, for her life, for the hope that had sparked in this ruined hall. Slowly, the energy threads that held Lyra's chains began to weaken. Tiny sparks fell away like fragments of dying stars. Her wrists tingled as movement returned. Tears formed in her eyes as she felt freedom inch closer. But the relief was tempered by fear, for he was trapped in the light, shaking violently, sweat glistening off his skin. The sacrifice he had made was real, and it was terrifying to witness. The commander lunged with his spear, anger and disbelief fueling each strike. Flinched, the vibrations of the weapon's impact echoing through his bones, but he pressed on, forcing the energy to remain focused on freeing Lyra. Every moment was a struggle, a test of will against pain, against fear, against death itself. He could feel himself weakening, could sense the light demanding total surrender. And yet, he would not give in. Lyra's voice broke as she called to him, her words full of emotion he could barely hear over the roar of energy. You can't do this alone." But he managed a weak smile, raising his gaze to meet hers. I'm not leaving, not now, not ever," he whispered, every word a battle. His body shook violently, but the light pulsed with recognition, responding to the human heart that refused to surrender. The chamber quaked as the platform surged. Sparks flew from the walls, shards of glass and metal raining down. The soldiers scattered, unsure whether to attack or flee. The commander's roar became a growl of fear. Was no ordinary human. He was something the platform had never experienced: pure determination, unwavering courage, and sacrifice without hesitation. Slowly, the chains around Lyra shattered completely. They fell in glowing fragments to the floor. She stumbled toward, relief and awe flooding her chest. But when she reached him, she saw the strain etched into every line of his body, the way his breath came in ragged gasps. He had risked everything for her, endured unimaginable pain, and still he remained upright, refusing to let go. Tears streamed down Lyra's face as she knelt beside him. How are you still standing?" she whispered, voice trembling with wonder and fear. He managed a faint, painful smile. "Because I had to keep you alive," he said. "You mattered more than anything." In that moment became more than a visitor, more than a warrior. He became a symbol, a human who had faced impossible odds and endured suffering beyond comprehension to save another. And in Lyra's eyes, he was nothing short of a miracle. The soldiers hesitated, their weapons trembling in their hands. The platform's light continued to pulse, now calmer but still powerful, a reminder of the human heart that had commanded it through sheer will. And in the silence that followed, the first sound of hope rang through the ruined hall, echoing across the shattered empire. The chamber still vibrated from the power of the platform. His body shook with exhaustion, his muscles screaming, his breath shallow and ragged. Every ounce of strength he had was spent, yet he remained upright, holding the protective energy around Lyra. She stepped closer, her eyes wide with fear and admiration, seeing the human who had risked everything for her. She wanted to reach out, to touch him, to take some of the pain away. But the energy shield pulsed between them, a living barrier he had learned to control only with sheer will. The commander, staggering from the earlier shocks of the platform, roared in fury. "Enough!" he bellowed, his voice shaking the walls. He raised his massive spear, the weapon crackling with energy, and charged toward the platform, determined to end the human's defiance once and for all. Soldiers behind him hesitated, unsure whether to follow, their confidence shaken by the strange, unstoppable force surrounding. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to stop him, to throw herself in front of the spear, but lifted his gaze to meet hers. Even in pain, his expression was calm, resolute. Every word he whispered carried the weight of determination. "Step back. I can't let them touch you," he said, his voice strained but unwavering. "Trust me, just stay behind me." The commander charged with a roar but pushed his last reserves of energy into the platform. The light surged higher, forming a radiant wall that exploded outward, creating a shockwave across the chamber. The force sent the soldiers flying, weapons clattering across the floor. The ceiling cracked and fell in shards, yet the human stood firm, the platform's power bending to his will. Lyra rushed to his side, finally able to move through the shield as the energy pulsed outward. She pressed her hands to his arms, feeling the heat, the strain, the raw force of his sacrifice. Tears ran freely down her face. "You can't hold this forever," she cried. "You have to stop." He shook his head slightly, a faint smile forming despite the pain. I can't," he gasped. "Not while you are still in danger." Every breath was a battle, every heartbeat a defiance against the platform's consuming energy. He could feel his strength slipping, his body reaching its limit. Yet somehow he managed to maintain the energy, wrapping it around Lyra, keeping her safe from the attack. The platform glowed brighter than ever, responding to his unwavering resolve. The commander, caught off guard by the sudden force, faltered. The shockwave had destabilized the chamber floor, sending cracks racing like lightning across the stone. The soldiers fell one by one, unable to navigate the chaos. Felt the energy around him surge in response, amplifying his will, turning his sacrifice into a shield strong enough to stop even the leader. Finally, the moment came. Gathered the last of his strength and forced the energy outward in one final, blinding burst. The platform released a wave of golden light that threw the commander against the wall, knocking the spear from his hands. The energy subsided, and the chamber fell silent except for the crackling of fires and distant groans. Lyra rushed to, holding him tightly. "You did it, you saved me," she whispered, voice trembling. She could feel the exhaustion in his body, the weight of every second he had endured, and yet he smiled weakly up at her. "I couldn't let them take you," he said, voice fatting but still full of purpose. "You mattered more than anything." The soldiers fled, defeated and humiliated, their confidence broken by a human who had dared to stand against them. In that moment was no longer just a visitor, no longer just a warrior from a distant, underestimated species. He was a hero, a savior, a living proof that courage and selflessness could overcome even the greatest odds. Lyra stayed by his side, supporting him as he sank to his knees, exhausted but alive. She looked around at the ruined chamber, at the fallen soldiers, at the shattered chains that once held her captive. And she realized something profound. Humanity, fragile as it seemed, carried a power that no armor, no weapon, no empire could ever fully anticipate. In that ruined hall, with fire and dust drifting through the air, Lyra held his hand, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her palm. The impossible had been done. The princess was free, and the human had shown her and her people that bravery and sacrifice could shine brighter than any star in the sky. The battle was over, but silence filled the chamber like a heavy blanket. Dust floated in the air, sparkling faintly in the golden light of the ruined platform. They had retreated, their cries echoing in the distance, leaving only the echoes of destruction behind. Lyra stood beside, holding his trembling hand, her eyes wide with wonder and gratitude. He was still alive, though barely, yet somehow, against every odds, he had saved her. Her chest rose and fell quickly as tears slid down her cheeks. "You risked everything," she whispered, voice trembling, "for me, for all of us." He managed a faint smile, sweat and dirt streaking his face. "It was for me," he gasped. "It was for you, for everyone who still needed hope." The citizens cautiously entered the hall, their steps slow, eyes full of awe. They had witnessed something they never thought possible. A human, an outsider, a fragile visitor from another world, had faced impossible odds, endured unimaginable pain, and used courage alone to save a princess, and in doing so, preserved the spirit of an entire empire. Murmurs ran through the crowd. Some cried in relief. Others bowed in reverence. The idea of human bravery, once doubted, had been proven beyond question. Lyra helped to a nearby fallen pillar, easing him down carefully. Every movement seemed fragile, his body trembled with exhaustion, yet his eyes shone with life and determination. She pressed her hand to his cheek, feeling the warmth of him, the pulse that had carried so much courage. "You are extraordinary," she said softly, tears slipping freely. "Not just because you fought, but because you chose to care when no one else would." Let out a weak laugh, voice husky. I didn't think I'd matter," he said, "but maybe caring is the only thing that really counts." Lyra smiled through her tears, shaking her head gently. "No," she said firmly. "You matter more than you know. You've given us hope that even the darkest night can end in light." Outside the palace, the sun began to rise, casting warm rays across the floating towers. Smoke still rose from ruined streets, but the light of day brought clarity, a sense of renewal. Lyra and emerged together, supporting each other, showing the people that the nightmare had ended. The citizens cheered, their voices carrying across the city. They called out the human's name, honoring him not just as a warrior but as a symbol, a reminder that courage, love, and sacrifice could come from the most unexpected places. Later, when the palace healers attended to, Lyra stayed beside him, refusing to leave. He was weak, pale, and battered, but his spirit remained unbroken. "I should have been stronger," he whispered. "I almost didn't make it." Lyra held his hand tightly. "You were stronger than anyone else could have been. You saved me, saved all of us. That is strength beyond measure." Days passed, and the story of Hale spread throughout the empire. Humans were no longer underestimated. They were recognized for a bravery that transcended species, a kind of courage born from heart and will, not power or size. Leaders and scholars recorded the tale, artists painted him in golden light, and children whispered his name with wonder. He had changed how an entire civilization saw humanity. But to Lyra, it was simpler than legend or recognition. She had seen his heart. She had witnessed his sacrifice. And she knew the truth. Heroism was not measured by titles, wealth, or weapons. It was measured by the willingness to put another's life above your own. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lyra and sat together on a high balcony, looking out over the empire they had helped save. "You gave your life for me," she whispered, voice soft, "and I can never fully repay that." Turned to her, smiling faintly, still tired but steady. "You don't have to," he said. "The galaxy, the stars, they'll remember, but I just wanted to make sure you lived." Lyra took his hand in both of hers, pressing it to her chest. "And I will," she said. "Because of you, because of your heart. Your courage will live in every who walks these towers, and in me, forever." Above them, the stars began to shine once more, brighter than before. And somewhere, across the vastness of the universe, the story of a human warrior who dared to sacrifice everything for another life spread like fire, a testament to the power of heart, hope, and the courage to stand when all seems lost. In that moment, Lyra realized the truth every ruler must know. The greatest power in the universe is not a weapon, not an army, not wealth, but a human heart that chooses to shine in the darkest night. And Hale's heart had just become legend.